Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Organizations, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topics. Rupert, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Shradha. How are you? I'm very good, thank you.
Very well, very well. So, I am ready to roll into our next topic.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
I have been thinking about it, Rupert, that as we design organizations, there are so many elements and dynamics that we don't see that are very intangible and tacit in the system, but then they play a lot of they have a lot of effect on the entire system. And one of that element is power, because power is always there, excuse me, in the organization design, but we really don't design for it, but we should always think about it. So how do we think about power, and what exactly should we be thinking about power is something that I would love to discuss today. What do you think?
Great. No, let's do it.
So in my as we have been discussing that power is for two types, like it's hard power and soft power. Hard power is actually through really the lines and boxes, who reports into who has what P&L and business and work, and that drives a power, a certain kind of. And it's also who attached to the real value drivers of the business, right? But then there is a soft power based on personality and behaviors of the people. But how do we think about it when we are designing an organization? Like, what should we be considering, and what exactly should be on our minds?
So, as you say, so org design is just. I think the first thing to recognize is org design is influencing hard power. It may have an impact on soft power, but soft power really comes from individuals and knowledge, and you can have no one reporting to you, be accountable for almost nothing, and will extreme informal soft power.
Right.
And
Right.
interesting, some people are very quiet and they speak in a quiet tone, and they don't say much. And when they do, everyone listens, and they have huge influence and impact. And that is the way it should be. And I think as org design professionals, we just need to not become sycophant with this and try and think that we can engineer everything. We can only, it's our ability to influence is limited. So within that, the hard power, your point, like how many resources are we giving to certain roles? So what's the span of control and the number of, the resources and the investment? But it's also setting up governance structures, and in particular, within the RAD framework. So who's responsible for what? That's a certain degree of power. You're empowering someone to be responsible, or a role to be responsible, and someone takes that role. That's an explicit part of empowering, which is a nicer way of thinking about power, because it's empowering. You're depowering the role by having approvals there, and so the A is for approve, and that's actually giving other people, and particularly with veto power, but you need checks and balances. And so there has to be a check on the power, on the R, the responsible, and that's what the A does. And the A is there to have that governance and those controls. And in many situations, that is highly appropriate. You need those checks and balances. And even if you're responsible, you need to answer to, everyone has to answer to someone. And, what things do you need to get approvals for, and do you need to be challenged on, etc. So, and then
It's a good tension. It's good tension to have in the organization. Yeah.
And org design is about, and in large part, solving tensions. There's no perfect design, and so these balances. And a classic is sales want, from a manufacturing context, long run lengths, short run lengths rather, right? If you're in sales, because you want to be able to react quickly. Manufacturing, supply chain want long run lengths because of the setup costs, and it impacts efficiency. So there's many situations where you've got different objectives that are contradictory to each other. And so you both, in those scenarios, maybe you need to both approve and you have to agree and find ways of disagreeing agreeably, as the folks from the rest is politics like to say. So, I think that's important. So that's part of the formal org design lens that's being put on this. And who's in what, as you're doing meeting design and forum design, who's in the forum, who is an attendee with, say, approval rights, and who's an observer and who's not there. That, who gets invited to a meeting and doesn't get invited to a meeting is also part of that dynamic. I guess my reflection a little bit about this is a lot of people could see this as being a very negative thing. Mm-hmm. Because power sounds like, Machiavelli and control and, pumping out chests and who has the power and who doesn't.
Exactly. Aggression and so showing that. Right.
Yeah. So I think you could see it that way, or you could say decisions need to be made, things need to be executed, people need to be held accountable. It's natural. Any system with people in it, there are power dynamics. If you go to wolf pack, a bunch of wolves, there's a hierarchy of power. Or baboons and all these sorts. They all have these dynamics. These dynamics are just true in nature and true with humans. Right. And so having a thoughtful design, so it's not dysfunctional and it's not as it's lovely, the balance is right, and empowering down, which is obviously what everyone wants, but that the people at the top have got the things where you can make those trade-offs, because not everything can be pushed down and not everything clearly can be pushed up, and it's a balance, and being thoughtful about this helps.
Right. And I think the way you're starting to describe is like the power is not just about chest thumping, but it's also about actually taking the stress out of the system sometimes. Like when the organization and leader is powerful, their power is also to yield it in a right way, that they are not putting the stress back into the system. They are able to make some decisions at that level that, that does not percolate down into the organization. The other thing that started to come in my head as you were talking about is that when we are thinking about power, people yield power in different ways. So it could be through decisions, but it could also be through resources, as you had said. It could be through information. And so we should think about that as we are designing the organizations or the dynamics of the systems of organization, excuse me, how does these power are being utilized by the people? And do we have, as an HR, we always have a lot of information, a lot of sensitive information. Are we using that in a good way or not in a good way? Or we have resources, are we holding them back so that we can yield power, or we can utilizing them freely? So there are a lot of those power dynamics also, which may manifest as an org design challenge, but actually is a power dynamics which is underlying. And I think one should have that kind of a keen eye to say that, is this because of org design, or is it because of actually there's a power dynamic that is going on, and what is creating an org tension? And so I think that is also something that we should, like, as we practice org design, we need to keep that in mind, that how are we distributing power or reducing or increasing power in a more mindful way. It will always be there. You cannot take, to your point, Rupert, you cannot take the power dynamics out of the system, but how are we designing so that it is well utilized and it is in a right way?
There's also a great use case here for the how it model. And for those that didn't listen to the podcast, how it stands for how will it work in practice? And thinking through how will these decisions be made? Who will make it and how will it be executed? When there's a conflict of X, or there's an issue of why, how would we resolve that? And asking those how questions, and then thinking through design, thinking through those power dynamics helps enormously. And it's just a lens. It's another lens. We say we want to empower people. Have we? Have we pushed? That's where you can push the A's for approving down, or take A's out and say, actually, the person responsible doesn't need someone approving. They're just responsible, and just hold them to account. And they've made decisions. And so that's another way of improving, is taking the A's for approve out. And you can see that in the data. So that's just my other reflection around role playing through the how games, and just counting the A's and seeing that, because it's about the appropriate controls.
Absolutely. And decision makings, and who has the right to what decision making. And they have to do the work, but somebody else has to make the decision. Then it definitely creates those power dynamics and unhealthy tensions in the organization. Great. So Rupert, what is your takeaway?
My big one is to understand the limitations of org design. And don't try and believe that org design is the panacea for controlling all power, but it can have a huge impact on power, and it should. But equally, we need to, I'm an optimist, and I see the good things in life. See the beauty in those people that wield power through the strength of their convictions, their knowledge, etc. And this is not an org design thing, but those people that have natural authority and are doing things that are in alignment with the culture of the organization, the goals of the organization, that needs to be recognized and rewarded. And the inverse to that, the opposite of that, you need to do the opposite of take measures to control that, right? Where someone's wielding too much power where they shouldn't, and in a negative way. But that's not an org design thing. That's just a leadership management thing.
Right.
And your takeaway, Shradha?
My takeaway is that whenever you see a tension in org design, just don't go look for lines and boxes and reporting hierarchy. Think about these underlying situations of where is the power, how is it being yielded? Is it being yielded through information, or through decision making, or through, say, resources? And therefore, what can you do about it? Not every time moving people around or boxes around can get organization to work in the right way, but it's the flow of power, just like the flow of work in the organization is important, that we need to think through as practitioners.
Actually, just one other point, sorry to throw it in at the end, but there's power conflicts. And often when the power conflict comes into place is where the incentives are misaligned, strategy is not clear, or the responsibilities are just unclear. And both parties believe they have the R for responsible, and it's not clear. And so the lack of design results in that tension because you haven't clarified it. And just clarify the rules of the game. And if person A is responsible, role A is responsible, not person A, it's the role A is responsible, then just be clear. Say, role B, you're not for this activity. And so therefore that addresses that. So I think lack of org design creates a lot of these power conflicts, and then the games and the politics that happens because they're just filling in the vacuum.
I love that. I love that point. I think that is a great point for us to close this episode. So thank you so much, as always, Rupert. Take care. Until next time.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.